So this was, yes.
Agree with Pastor Puso, but slightly different with the chronology of how they were supposed to share, because I propose that maybe even if they were 20 years, I think in several times, after 20 years, sometimes it was more a prominent man who can even subdue and have even to take his property. But I don't know what's make them to undement on the matter.
Okay, thank you very much for all your opinions. Now you see the correct answer.
Yes.
Yes,
Prof.
a very minimal different.
Yes, the difference is not very significant, only just about 2,000 people, less than 2,000 people, 1,800 about this number. So it looks.
I think it's significant in the sense that, Prof, usually with populations, they usually keep growing. It's rare for populations after years to go down. So I think that in that sense, even though the numerical is not significant, but the point is significant.
Yes, this is significant, especially when we take into consideration the promise of God, because God promised to make them a big nation, to multiply them. So they are supposed to be multiplying. But we can see that it looks like they didn't multiply very much during the 40 years of journey in the wilderness. And if you take into consideration that actually they don't have any any problems, they have food, they have clothes, they had everything, but they were not able to multiply. So what is also in this case, we can say that actually it is a negative trend, because it is a sign that they didn't have a blessing of God, so they were not able to be blessed. So they're not blessed. But what is important, if we take a look at some particular tribes. For example, Reuben, in the beginning, there were 46,000, in the end, 43. So they are about 3,000 less than in the beginning. But look at Simeon. In the beginning, almost 60, in the end, only 22. So God also diminished. Judah increased, not very much, but increased. Issachar also increased. Zebulun increased. Ephraim diminished, and significantly diminished. And Manasseh increased and significantly increased. And so if you compare these two tribes, Manasseh and Simeon, their population changed very dramatically during the journey in wilderness. Population of Simeon, like 60% less than in the beginning, and the population of Manasseh is almost 60% plus in the end. And Benjamin also increased, Dan increased, Asher increased, but Naphtali decreased. So now there is a question, and I think that you will easily answer this question. So all of them were in the same conditions. So we cannot say that one of them were exposed to some dangers and some of them not. So all of them lived in the same conditions. So what is the reason why some tribes increased and some tribes decreased in the population?
I'll take a guess, Prof, and say it probably has to do with their relation to the different rebellions that took place
Correct.
in Israel. I would also like to see the numbers of the Levites, how they fared during the time, because they were spared, for example, during the golden calf incident. I don't know if you have those numbers.
We don't have another census for the Levites. So it looks like they
That's probably also significant as well.
Yes, they didn't participate.
Of course, they did not inherit any land. So that's
yeah, maybe that is why they're not included. They're not counted. Because as I said, one of the, I would say the main purpose of this census was just to know how many tribes are in, not tribes, but how many clans are in Israel to distribute the land. And maybe because of that, Levites are not mentioned at all. Yes, so your guess is correct. It is related to the rebellions during the journey in the wilderness. And let us look at the Simeon tribe. So Simeon tribe is not very, how to say, prominent in Israel. And actually what we know about this tribe, that last time it is mentioned in the book of Judges, and after that, this tribe just disappears. So we don't know anything about this tribe. Yes, Pastor Joseph Karani, yeah, I see you raised the hand, please.
I have some contrary opinion on the matter. But I'm trying to relate the blessings of these generations on now what to predict them in the future. For example, Naphtali is being told that you can let loose and given godly ones. And in fact, here we can see some decrease. And also when I try also to reflect some kind of like God, where the trough shall overcome him, I can see also the number is not doing well. And when I try to relate someone like Asher, being told his brand shall be fact and he shall union loyal deities, and I can see the numbers also increase. I don't know whether I can connect to the blessings and how much what happens in the future when they get there. But I have time, you can correct or comment about it.
Yeah, it could be that you can connect this with the blessings of Jacob in Genesis 49. But do you remember the blessing for Dan? It was not a good one. But do you see the tribe of Dan increased? So I'm not sure that we can find, and if you compare the blessing, for example, for Joseph's sons, so for Joseph, the blessing is very nice, but we can see that one tribe, Manasseh, increased, but another tribe, Ephraim, decreased. So I don't think that we can connect directly to the blessings of Jacob, but we can connect it to the immediate context. And I would like to pay attention to the tribe of Simeon. Why? Because the tribe of Simeon is mentioned just in chapter 25, in the previous chapter, before the census. So do you remember in what connection it was mentioned?
Is it Balpio?
Pardon?
Is it the rebellion at Balpio?
Yes, yes. Read, for example, verse 14. The name of the slain Israelite man who was struck dead with the Midianite woman was Zimri, son of Salu, the leader of a Simeonite family. So in this case, we can say that this dramatic decrease of the tribe of Simeon is not accidental. But what we see in the last rebellion, in the very last rebellion, even the leader of the tribe was one who was the most active. So if the leader was the most active in this rebellion, we can see that, and he actually acted arrogantly, like he openly committed a sin when he took this woman and openly brought it to the camp of the Israelites in the view of everybody. So we can see that the entire tribe did the same, or most of them did the same. And that is why they diminished so dramatically and we can see it in the second census. So what we can say that most probably these numbers of the Israelites are related to their behavior in the journey. So those of them who didn't participate in the rebellions, they increased more, and those who participated, they decreased. So this is just an assumption, but I think this assumption is very, very solid. So we can say like this. Okay. Any other comments or questions about that? I would like to add also that in Numbers 26, when we compare how the structure of the census is done in chapter 26 with the census in the first chapters, so we can see some differences. And the differences are with some insertions in this census or some explanations of this census. For example, verse 9. This is the explanation of the number of the people in the tribe of Reuben. And verse 9 says, the sons of Eliab were Nemuel, Dathan, and Abiram. It was Dathan and Abiram, chosen by the community, who fought against Moses and Aaron. They and Korah's followers fought against the Lord. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them with Korah, when these followers died and the fire consumed 250 men. They serve as a warning sign. And the sons of Korah, however, did not die. So do you see in this case what we have? What is interesting, this detail. So we have the census, and in this census, all sons of Eliab are mentioned. But for Dathan and Abiram, there is an additional explanation. Why? Because evidently those people died and their names remained, but because all their family also were killed, because of that, it looks like they will not get inheritance in the promised land. So they will not inherit the land. After that, we can find some other interesting explanation about, for example, about Judah. No, there is no about Judah, but about somebody else. In this census, for some reasons, in verse 33, Zelophehad daughters are mentioned, but this is an exception because what we have here, we are supposed to have only the men representatives, not the girls, not the women. Okay, so do you see the idea of the census of chapter 26 is to explain who get the land and who didn't get the land. And now we are coming to chapter 27, and in chapter 27 of the book of Numbers, we have one very interesting request of the daughters of Zelophehad. And in order to understand this request, we need to understand ancient Near East background of this request. So what we know about inheritance or law of inheritance in the Bible, and not only in the Bible, but in ancient Near East in general. Usually, and I think in some of the nations, we have similar laws about inheritance, but maybe now when we have like globalization, these laws are changed. But in ancient times, we have a tradition. According to this tradition, only the male generations, the male descendants or the sons inherited the land, but daughters usually didn't inherit the land. So when, for example, I have a daughter and she is about to marry, in this case, I just can give her a dowry or some present, and I don't give her a land. So in this case, land was inherited only by male representatives of the family, but not by female. And of course, there are some cases, for example, if somebody doesn't have sons. So what happened to the inheritance? And this is exactly the case of Zelophehad's daughters. So what we know from the narrative, Zelophehad died in the wilderness, during the journey in the wilderness. But as daughters say, he didn't die because of the rebellion. They said that he died because of his own sin. So it looks like his father, their father, didn't participate very actively in the rebellions. And when everybody came to get the portion of the land in the book of Numbers, nobody could come from the Zelophehad family because father died and daughters were not supposed to be in this meeting. And that is why they ask Moses to intervene and to do something. And when we look at the ancient Near East background, so we can see very interesting cases. It was not only the case of Israel, but in some other nations we can see the same traditions. For example, this is a will from Muzi. These are the words of you. This is the proper name. I have adopted my daughter, and the name of the daughter, as a son. Everything, my fields, my houses, my investments, my acquisitions, my slaves, and all property, I have given to my daughter, whom I have adopted as a son. So do you see, people in the ancient Near East were very inventive, creative, and this is a very similar case. For example, when a father who didn't have sons, but have the only daughter, and he wanted to transfer his property after his death to his daughter. But according to the law, daughter is not supposed to inherit especially the land and some other things. So in this case, what he did, he adopted his own daughter as a son. So he tried to avoid this tradition, and he says that actually my daughter is my son, and that is why she can inherit my property after my death. Or another story, these are the words of you, proper name, my wife, I have appointed as a father to my daughter. As long as my wife shall live, my daughter shall honor her and care for her. Whenever my wife dies, my daughter shall mourn her and bury her. If my daughter is not obedient to my wife, then they shall shackle her, shave the mark of the slave on her head, put her in the workhouse in the muzzle and muzzle her. If my wife should go to live with a man, then her brothers shall kill her. My wife shall not give anything away to a strange man. So this is the continuation of the same will. But, oops. So this is sorry. And there was another, I didn't present it in the slide. There was another will or another agreement document from Nuzi. And according to this document, another father also who had the same problem when he had only daughter and he didn't have sons. So how he secured that his property will go to his daughter. He adopted another man as a son, and he made a special conditions. So his adopted son should marry his daughter. And in case if he decides to divorce her daughter, so all the property will go to the daughter. So he wanted to secure that his property will go to his daughter. So people were very, very creative to try to secure that the inheritance will go to their descendants. When we speak about the Bible, we can find some other cases in the Bible. For example, in the case of Job, if you read the last chapter of the book of Job, we can see that Job gave property, gave land even to his daughters. So it looks like it was not a very, very strict law in all the nations, and in some nations, some variations were possible. But what we can know about Israel, we can be sure that in Israel, the property, especially the land, was given only to the sons, to the male descendants. One more example of such case is that it is about the priest's daughters. In case that in Israel there was an understanding like this. So if a woman wants to marry somebody from another tribe, so she should join his tribe. She cannot be after the marriage. For example, if the daughter from Judah and the husband is from Ephraim, after the marriage, daughter is not a member of Judah tribe. She is now a member of Ephraim tribe. How can we know this? We know this from the law about daughters of the Levites, not Levites, of the priest. So if a priest has a daughter and daughter wants to marry somebody from another tribe, in this case, before she married, if she's still in the house of her father, she can eat from the sacrifices, because you know that the family members of the priest can eat the sacrifices, meat from the sacrifices. But if she married to somebody from another tribe, she cannot eat anymore from the sacrifices. So in this case, we can see that it was clear that she is considered a member of another tribe. She is not from the tribe of Aaron anymore or Levite anymore, but she is a member of another tribe. So what happened in Numbers chapter 27? We can see that daughters of Zelophehad approached Moses and said, so do you see it is something not fair for us, because it looks like we will remain without any property. Our father died, so he didn't get any portion of the land, and we will not have any land at all. So Moses approached God, he prayed to God, and God said, yeah, they are right. So they shall inherit the property as if their father should be alive. So they should get this inheritance. And we can see that actually this is happened like this. But in the end of the book of Numbers, we can see that other members of the tribe of Manasseh, they were from the tribe of Manasseh. Other members from the tribe of Manasseh were not happy with this decision. And why they are not happy? Because if those daughters marry somebody from a different tribe, so it means this portion of land will transfer to another tribe. And in this case, it is not very good because they will not be able to keep intact the borders of the land of the tribe. So Moses came to the solution that daughters of Zelophehad should marry only within their own tribe. So they cannot marry to somebody who is outside their tribe. So why we speak so much about those daughters of Zelophehad? Because in the end of the book of Numbers, those daughters of Zelophehad are representatives of the new Israel. So how can we characterize this new Israel? If you compare this new Israel with the previous generation, those who died in the wilderness, we can see that these two representatives are very, very different from each other. For example, the first generation of the people who died in the wilderness, they didn't care very much about the land. Many times they said that they want to go back to Egypt. So Egypt for them was much better than the promised land. They even portrayed Egypt in the language of the promised land because they said that Egypt was the land flowing with milk and honey, not the promised land. So they didn't evaluate, they didn't pressure they didn't appreciate the land, the gift of land. But the daughters of Zelophehad, on the contrary, so do you see, they have not got the land yet, the land have not been conquered. It is still in the future, but they want to get it. They want to secure the right of property of the land. And this is a picture of a new Israel. So the new generation, not those who were slaves in Egypt, but the new generation that was born to them. These are people who really, those who want to follow God. They believe in God, they believe in God's promises, and they want to go to the promised land. So do you have any questions about that?
Prof?
Yes.
A question about the story of Naomi and Ruth.
Yes.
And we are aware that Naomi is husband died, and also the two sons. And in fact, the sojourn with daughter-in-law Ruth. What happens to the property of
this is a little bit different issue, but I will answer. So in the case of Naomi and Eliezer, her husband. So in this case, what happened? In the land of Judah, there was a famine in the land of Judah. And when there was a famine, they decided to migrate to another country. So most probably what they did before they left Judah, they sold their property. They sold their portion of the land to somebody. And they moved to another country, to Moab. And they lived in Moab, everybody died. So most probably they bought something, I don't know what happened. But it looks like when all the male members of the family died, it was very difficult for women to maintain the house and everything, the household. Why? Because in the Bible, you can see that the destiny of the widow is very, very difficult. Nobody would like to be a widow. Why? Because people lived from the land. And if it is only one woman with the family, it's very difficult for her to do the agricultural work and to maintain the family. So that is why widow is the most vulnerable, one of the most vulnerable part of the society. And what happened with Naomi and her daughters-in-law? When they came back, when Naomi and Ruth came back to Judah, they didn't have the land, they didn't have the property, and they didn't have the means for existence. They cannot earn money, it was just impossible for them. That is why what Ruth is doing, he is going to the fields of other people just to pick up something that was left after the harvest was harvested. And we can see this situation. But according to the law, and this is the law, first of all, this is there are two laws here. One about the land, the inheritance of the land. So if my relative is poor and he sold his property, so the responsibility of the relative is to redeem his property as soon as possible. And this is, the relative is called Goel. Goel is a kinsman or relative, closest relative. So for example, if my brother became poor and he sold his land because he's poor, my responsibility as a brother to redeem his land and to return this land to him. If the land is not returned, I also poor and I cannot redeem the land. So my brother, or my family, the family of the brother is supposed to wait until the year of Jubilee year. And on the year of Jubilee, the property comes back to the original owner. And this system in Israel, I would say it is a very, very smart system that God suggested. Because in this system of the year of Jubilee, when the property returns back to the original owner, protects the society of the Israelites from being somebody very rich and somebody very poor. Why? So just imagine that I'm good like businessman or something. I live in Israel and everything is going well with me. So I have my portion of the land. My neighbor became poor and I purchased his portion of the land. Somebody also became poor and I purchased his portion of the land. So I became very, very rich. And my children can even make my estate bigger. So very soon I can become my family could become a very, very rich family, like magnates or like oligarchs in our time. But according to the law of Jubilee, what happened? It looks like according to the law of Jubilee, even if I became very rich and my children also are rich, but one day comes when all the property that I have, that I purchased from other people, should be returned to the original owners. And in this case, if the property returns, so everything starts from the very beginning. My family is again has only one small portion of, not small, but that is my portion of land, and everything starts again. So nobody could be very rich and nobody could be very, very poor, because this system tries to balance this situation in Israel. So what happened in the book of Ruth? We can see that Boaz was a relative. He was not the closest relative because there was somebody who was closer to Naomi and his family. But anyway, Boaz was a relative. So what he is doing as a relative, as a Goel, Boaz is supposed to redeem the property. And when the closest relative rejects to redeem it, Boaz says, I will redeem. And because Naomi and Ruth, Naomi doesn't have children, and I mean her children died, and Ruth doesn't have children. So Boaz married Ruth in order to continue the line of Elimelech, yeah. The line of Elimelech, and now we have this line is continuing. So the two laws are involved here: the law about the inheritance of the land and the levirate marriage. Okay, did I answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Okay, so let us continue with the book of Deuteronomy. And this is a very, very fascinating book. I remember when I didn't appreciate this book. I didn't appreciate this book very much because I thought that this book is just a repetition of the law, and that's all. But in fact, the book of Deuteronomy is very, very important, and it is not just a repetition of the law, but it has a very significant theology. So let's start to understand what is the main message of the book and why the repetition of the law was needed here. So the title of the book is Devarim, and Devarim, this is the first words are Ele HaDevarim. These are the words. So we can say that this, the words Devarim is just a title in Hebrew. But in LX6, in the Septuagint, it was called Deuteronomy, and Deuteronomion means the second law. And it was like a very, very ancient tradition or understanding that this is just a repetition of some laws of the book of Exodus and Leviticus, and that's all. And yes, so it is just like a repetition. But in fact, the book of Deuteronomy is very important, and it has a very, very significant theology. And we can compare, for example, the Exodus covenant. Yeah, just let me go a little bit further. Let us speak about the structure of the book. When we speak about the structure of the book, there were several attempts how we can define the structure. One of the attempts is, it is very natural, we can divide it on 4 speeches of Moses. By the way, one of the particular feature of the book of Deuteronomy, that in the book of Deuteronomy, God almost doesn't speak at all. Everything that we have in the book of Deuteronomy is what Moses speaks. And even when we have the beginning of the book, the Ele HaDevarim, this is not the words of God, but these are the words of Moses. So the book is presented as the words of Moses. That is why we can divide it on 4 speeches, like Deuteronomy 1 up to 4, Deuteronomy 4:44 up to 28, and again, one more speech from 28 up to 30, and the last song in chapter 33. And chapter 34 is an epilogue. So this is one way how we can divide the book, or how can we present the structure of the book. Another way how we can present the structure is, as I mentioned to you, as a suzerain treaty. And we can find many parallels, almost all parallels, with the Hittite suzerain treaties. For example, the book, the Hittite suzerain treaties usually starts with the preamble. This says somebody, the great king, king of Hatti, king son of la 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 la. This identifies the author of the covenant, giving his titles and attributes as well as his genealogy. After that, we have historical prologue. This section of the treaty describes in detail the previous relationship between the parties. After that, we have stipulations, provisions for deposit in the temple, and periodic public reading of the text of the covenant. the list of gods as witnesses. And what else? The curses and blessings. Yeah, the curses and blessings. And exactly this structure we can find in the book of Deuteronomy. For example, the first 5 verses we can identify as preamble. After that, we have historical prologue, when Moses recites the history of Israelites, how God cared about them when they were in the wilderness. After that, we have general stipulation from chapter 5 until the end of chapter 11. After that, we have specific stipulations. After that, we have blessings and curses in chapter 27 and 28. After that, we have witnesses when Moses calls heaven and earth to be the witnesses of the covenant. And succession arrangements we can have in chapter Deuteronomy 31, 34. So these are the structure. We can say that this is the structure of the book of Deuteronomy. Yes, Pastor Poswa.
Just quickly, Prof, I see that in points 7 and 6 and 7, some chapters overlap. Is that intentional?
What do you mean? Overlap.
For example, you have the witnesses, they overlap. For example, you have chapter 31 and 32.
Yes, yes.
Here, and then also in the succession arrangements, there's something similar.
Yes.
At least chapter 31 and 32 are also included.
Yes, yes, yes. So what I want to say that we cannot say that the order of these items is important. Sometimes you can see that the order could be reversed a little bit. Not so much, because usually it starts with preamble and historical prologue, and after that stipulations. But all other parts could go in different order. So, and Moses, do you see in some cases he comes back to the question about witnesses. So, and it is normal. So it's not a problem with this. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Yeah, what also I would like to emphasize, and this is important. Do you remember how the book of Isaiah starts? The second verse of the book of Isaiah.
Yes, Prof.
Do you remember? Can you read it? Chapter 1 and verse 2.
Verse 2 says, "Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken."
Just stop here. So why does Isaiah start his book with addressing to heaven and earth?
Is it the memorism? This is
no, it's not for the purpose of memorism. No, it could be a memorism, yes, but it is not the main issue here. Okay, let us read Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse 19.
Okay.
Can we read, please?
I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life.
Yeah, so all the prophets, they based their message mostly on the book of Deuteronomy. And that is why you can find in the book of prophets, you can find many, many references back to the book of Deuteronomy, to blessings and curses of the book of Deuteronomy. And in this case, when Isaiah starts his message like this, when God calls heaven and earth to like witnesses, so these are the witnesses of what?
The witnesses of the covenant.
Of the covenant. And what happened to the covenant? It is broken.
It was broken. Yeah, it was broken.
It is violated. And after that, we can find in a book of Isaiah, we can find that Isaiah actually mentions why they violated the covenant. And when you study the prophetic books, most probably the teacher who will teach you will tell you that there is one very important pattern in the prophetic books, and this is so-called rib pattern. A rib pattern or a prophetic lawsuit pattern. When the prophet on behalf of God starts a lawsuit with the nation, like a trial with the nation, and he tries to accuse the nation for the violating of the covenant. And this is exactly what we have in Isaiah chapter 1, when prophet speaks on behalf of God that the covenant is violated. And what is interesting, the pattern of this prophetic lawsuit, and you can also find a very nice article by Dr. Davidson, Richard Davidson. He wrote about that. The pattern is very similar to the pattern of the treaty. The only thing that the order of presentation is different. Like it starts with the addressing to the witnesses. After that, the section of curses, like in the book of Isaiah, he speaks about many transgressions of the people, and he speaks about the consequences of these transgressions. So we can see that actually the structure of this prophetic lawsuit with chapter of Deuteronomy. So we don't speak about a particular chapter of Deuteronomy. We can speak about the book of Deuteronomy in general. And we can say that the book of Deuteronomy is done according to suzerain treaty pattern. And I just say that in the book of Isaiah chapter 1, we can see a reversal of this pattern, because this is a prophetic lawsuit. Okay, I don't want to go very deep in the book of Isaiah today. It is not our topic. But what I want to tell you that very often when you read the prophetic books of the Old Testament, they refer back to the book of Deuteronomy. Because mostly what we have in the prophetic books, we have accusation of the violation of the covenant. So that is why they go back, especially to the part of the curses. And they say that all those curses are implemented. And do you remember that when we read the book of Deuteronomy, that the last curse that is mentioned there is exile. So why is exile mentioned as the last curse? And it is related to the idea of the covenant. According to the covenant, God gave Israel the promised land. And if Israelites are not faithful to God, so the final punishment for the Israelites is that God will take away the land from them. So he gave them the land, and the final curse is you will go to exile, and it means you will lose your land, the gift that was given to you by God. Okay, so it is clear. So I hope that you understand that this pattern of suzerain treaty is very important for the book of Deuteronomy, because everything in the book of Deuteronomy is done according to this pattern. The first 5 verses is the preamble. After that, we have a historical prologue. Moses speaks about how God cared about the Israelites in the past. And after that, we have stipulations. Deuteronomy is more than a mere formal covenant text. For one thing, it is much longer than any extant documents of that kind. For another, it still presents itself as a farewell address by Moses, the covenant mediator, one filled with the non-legal passages such as itineraries, paraneses, and hints and other poetic material. In other words, Deuteronomy is of mixed and the right genre. But all this does not invalidate understanding the essential core of the composition as being covenant in style and purpose. So Eugene Medal in this quotation says that, of course, we can see that covenant is the most important idea of the book of Deuteronomy. And now we understand why the covenant is needed, because the previous generation died, and we need to renew the covenant with the new generation of the Israelites. So what are the parties of the covenant? The covenant of the book of Deuteronomy is made with the new generation of the Israelites. However, when Moses addresses the Israelites, he doesn't make any distinction between the young generation and the former generation who died in wilderness. And this is one of the particular interesting features of the book of Deuteronomy. So let us read it. Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 10. The day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, the Lord said to me, assemble the people before me. So Moses addresses the new generation of the Israelites, but he speaks to them as if they were the same people who presented at Horeb. But we know that not only a small part of them were present there at Horeb. Or for example, Deuteronomy 5:3. He did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with all of us who are alive here today. So do you see what Moses says? He says that God made, and he speaks about the covenant Sinai, and he says to this new generation of the Israelites that this covenant was not done with our fathers, but it was done with you, okay? And as I said, this is, on the first sight, it could look like very enigmatic. So why does Moses speak to the new generation as if it were the old generation of the Israelites? And here we can see the quotation from this book. Moses is employing a rhetorical technique involving the conflation of generations. The author intended his readers to see beyond the anachronism to the theological point behind it. So, and this is important issue of the book of Deuteronomy. So when Moses speaks, he conflates the generation. What it means, he speaks to the new generation as if it were the old generation of the Israelites. So for him, there is no difference between these two generations. Okay, do you get it?
Makes sense, Prof.
Okay, so another very important moment when we speak about the book of Deuteronomy is how this expression Hayom is used in the book. So it occurs quite often, 62 times. And do you know that Hayom, if you translate it literally, means this day? And usually, even in modern Hebrew, when they speak Hayom, it means today. So this day means today. But in the book of Deuteronomy, this word Hayom, this day, applied, for example, for the past events. Or let us read at least something like 5:24. You said, look, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and greatness, and we have heard his voice from the fire. Today we have seen that God speaks with a person. So, but of course, he speaks about the previous generation, but he uses the same word today. Or let us open chapter 9 and verse 10. On the day of the assembly, the Lord gave me 2 stone tablets. And on the day, in Hebrew, it is Hayom. So very often, Hayom refers to the past events. Of course, it refers to the present events, but also it refers to the future events. 6:24. The Lord commanded us to follow all these statutes and to fear the Lord our God for our prosperity always and for our preservation as it is today. And we can see some other moments when he refers to the future using this phrase Hayom. And what conclusion we can do from this usage of this word? It seems as if past, present, and future have come together and intertwined in today. And Gerhard von Rad observed, the divine revelation on Sinai is not something in the past, a matter of history, so far as the present generation to whom it is addressed is concerned. It is a present reality, determining the way of life of the very some people who receive it. So what I would like, what he wants to say, that for in the book of Deuteronomy, it looks like time, past, present, and the future came together in one point of time. So what happened in at plain of Moab, this generation that is present, it looks like it is in the past, it is in the present, and it is in the future. So I will give you several examples why he speaks like this and what is the idea behind it. For example, as I mentioned already, the Sinai. Moses made a covenant with this new generation. And one of the particular moments of the covenant was the presence of the glory of God. But Moses says that, and what we can see in the book of Deuteronomy, the glory of God is not shown to the people anymore. So they don't see this pillar of cloud or pillar of fire in the book of Deuteronomy. But Moses says that this experience of Sinai experience is applied to them as well. So as if they were at Sinai and saw this glory with their own eyes. Another example with the future. Later on, we can see that Moses, in the last chapters of the book of Deuteronomy, he says that when you go to the land of promised land, you will pronounce curses and blessings, and you will build an altar. So do you see, the ritual of the covenant has not been performed in the book of Deuteronomy. In the book of Deuteronomy is just the book of the speeches of Moses. Moses is speaking about everything, but there is no ritual of the covenant. But he speaks about the ritual of the covenant and about the covenant as if it has been already done. So as if it is done right now, today. But it will be done only in the future, when they conquer the land, when they go to the Mount Gebal and Gerizim, and when they pronounce these blessings and curses. And this ritual of the covenant is described in the book of Joshua in chapter 8. And just several verses describe how they did this. And Joshua didn't pay much attention to that because everything has been already said in the book of Deuteronomy. They just fulfilled what Moses said in the book of Deuteronomy. So in this case, we can see that really past, present, and future came together in one point of time. and this is today. So that is why they don't have, they are not witnesses of the glory of God, because the glory of God that was shown at Sinai is applied to them. They do not participate in the covenant. I mean, they do not make the ritual of the covenant. It will be done only in the future, but it looks like it is done already today. So everything is today. And this is a particular feature of the book of Deuteronomy. Do you understand it? Or I need to explain more about that?
Yes, please. Madam. It means that all of the details in this book, we need to put them all of today's life, or some of them may be put in the past time.
I didn't understand again, please.
I'm asking if all the details in the book of Deuteronomy may be put in today's life in our faith, or if some of them are regarding the past time of Moses.
As I said yesterday, my position on this question is like this. So we need to understand all the commandments. We need to understand the principle behind the commandment and to see how we can apply it to our everyday life, our today's life. But of course, we cannot apply everything directly. I will give you one example. In the Deuteronomy, there is a law according to which you cannot put you cannot wear clothes from different fabric. Do you remember this law?
No.
Yes, and you cannot even plant two crops in one field.
Yes. So usually it goes together, but I would like to speak about this one. You cannot wear a cloth made from two fabric or from different materials. So what is the purpose of this law? And who of us today is keeping this law? If you take any shirt, for example, so any shirt has always has several, very few, maybe it's very expensive. It is if it is done only from linen or only from cotton, 100% cotton. It's not usual today. They always add something else to the fabric, or even if you wear like jeans and linen or something like that. So nobody today keeps this commandment. And in order to understand this commandment, we need to dig a little bit deeper. And here, especially in this commandment, we can find some interesting detail. In Israel, there was a person who wore the cloth of different threads or of different fabric, of different material. And he was permitted to do this. Do you know who was he? Who he was? Do you know? Only one person in Israel could wear a garment with different fabric or different produced with different material. This was the high priest, because if you study the clothes, the garment of the high priest, you can see that he, in his clothes, in his garment, there were different like linen and some other material were intertwined together. In this case, we can understand this prohibition not to wear the cloth of different fabric, in the sense of not to pretend or not to usurp the power of the high priest.
Yes.
And if we understand this commandment from this point of view, so in this case, we can say that it is valid for us today. Yes. Because we have our heavenly high priest, and this is Jesus Christ. And nobody in this world is supposed to take his role upon himself. Okay?
Yes.
In this case, what the Pope did when they say that they are pontific or they are representative of Jesus on the earth, in this case, they usurp the power or the prerogatives of the high priest.
Yes.
Okay, so let us continue. Now, when we understood this issue, we need to discuss another important issue, and this what we want to do, what I would like to do is to compare the covenant of Sinai, the covenant that was done on Sinai, with the covenant that was done in the book of Deuteronomy. And you remember that in the book of book of Exodus, we can see that the promises were, you will be my treasured possession, you will be a kingdom of priests, and you will be a holy nation. So what we can say about the book of Deuteronomy, so we can see that this promise about treasured possession is repeated again. For example, and the Lord has today declared you to be his people, a treasured possession, as he promised you, and that you should keep all his commandments, and that he shall set you high above all nations. And we see it is just very, very similar to this promise that we can find in the book of Exodus, which he has made for praise, fame, and honor, that you shall be a consecrated, the people to the Lord your God. And it is very related to the holy nation, consecrated. But of course, the promise of the kingdom of priests has not been repeated. What about the obligations of the covenant? Scholars categorize the stipulation section of Deuteronomy into parts: the principles of the covenant, or the basic regulations, and the specific regulation. The first section contains Decalogue, repetition of the Decalogue, and the history of how the stone tablets of the covenant were delivered, and this story intertwined with different admonitions and exhortations. The author uses the concept of time and space in such a way that the experience of the new generation at Moab is portrayed as identical to that of the first generation at Sinai. This indicates that both covenants, the Sinai covenant and the Moab covenant, operate under the same basic regulations, the 10 commandments. So we can say that the obligations of the covenant are the same in both cases, but the promises are not the same because they are not royal priesthood anymore. The composition of the specific stipulations is more difficult to explain. This section presents a mixture of different ceremonial, religious, civil, and criminal laws. Not all laws mentioned in the book of Leviticus and Numbers were compiled in the book. And in this case, scholars ask a question. So when we speak about the obligations of the covenant or the laws of the covenant, why did Moses repeat some of the laws from the book of Leviticus, Numbers, and Exodus, and some of the laws were omitted? And also another question: how can we understand or explain the sequence of these laws? So were they taken just arbitrarily and put together or we can arrange them in special order? And of course, scholars try to find a kind of arrangements of those laws. For example, Tigay assumed that only some exemplary laws were selected to illustrate certain ideal principles of social justice and religious devotion. So this is one of the approach why Moses picked up these particular laws and put them in this book of Deuteronomy and omitted other laws. Moshe Weinfeld, a very famous scholar on the book of Deuteronomy, pointed out that the laws of the book of Deuteronomy are heavily dependent on the book of the covenant. He suggests that the author of Deuteronomy revised the laws of Exodus 21:23 according to his own ideology, with the purpose to replace the old book of the covenant. But of course, this explanation, we cannot agree with this explanation, because the presuppositions of the author are liberal. So he understands it like this, that one code of law was replaced by another code of law because the new code was, because the author maybe thought that the old code of laws are already obsolete and it should be replaced by the new. And it also could imply some diachronic perspective. What I mean that most probably Moshe Weinfeld doesn't believe that it was written by Moses, but that it was written by somebody else later on. And from diachronic perspective, when a new reality appeared, somebody just changed the laws of Exodus for the new collection of laws in the book of Deuteronomy. So we, of course, cannot accept this idea because it's liberal. And one of the most interesting approaches to the arrangements of the laws in the book of Deuteronomy was suggested by Stephen Kaufman. Stephen Kaufman is a very famous theologian, but mostly he works with the Aramaic language, and he even made a special project when he put, and his team, they put all known to us Aramaic texts on internet on one website. And in our days, you can go there and you can download any known Aramaic text. So all Aramaic archives, everything that was written on Aramaic language is put there on one website. Okay, so his suggestion is like this. The laws in Deuteronomy are arranged in sections that correspond to the commandments of the Decalogue. And this is very, very interesting suggestion. For example, what he says, the passage of Deuteronomy 12:1-24:8 emphasizes the importance of right worship and corresponds to the first two commandments. The motive of Sabbath is found in Deuteronomy 15 and 16. The laws of Deuteronomy 16:18 up to 18:22 revolve around the principle of respecting authorities, which is the main idea of the fifth commandment. Homicide and protection of human life, the sixth commandment, is the key concern of the regulations in Deuteronomy 19-22. Proper sexual relationship and prohibition of adultery is in Deuteronomy 22 up to 23. Finally, the laws protecting property, the eighth commandment, is classified in Deuteronomy 23 up to 24. So this suggestion is very, very interesting. And so far, maybe it is the best explanation of the arrangements of the commandments or different precepts in the book of Deuteronomy. Another interesting observation can be made if one compares the set of regulations in Exodus 34, the stipulations after the golden calf incident, when God announces that he is willing to renew the covenant, with the specific laws of the book of Deuteronomy. Every single commandment of Exodus 34 has its counterpart in the book of Deuteronomy. And for example, I will present this table for you. When promised to drive away the inhabitants of the land, we can find, but of course, in Exodus, everything is done in one chapter, but in the book of Deuteronomy, those commandments are spread and may be repeated in many, many parts of the book of Deuteronomy. Warning against making a covenant with the local people, we can find it again. Commands to destroy all the attributes of pagan cults also is repeated. Prohibition to worship other gods because Yahweh is a jealous God. prohibition of intermarriages, prohibition to make molten images, instruction for the Passover celebration, firstborn belong to God. So everything is repeated in the book of Deuteronomy. But of course, this suggestion may be not as comprehensive as the suggestion of Stephen Kaufman, because it lacks some more clarity. And this is the continuation of the same table when everything is repeated. And now, one more important issue that I would like to discuss with you is theophany of the covenant. And this is very, very important moment. So what I mean by theophany of the covenant, every covenant has its own theophany. Theophany, this is the word which means theo, God, and phaneo means to reveal, to show. So how God reveals himself in the covenant. And the concept of theophany is one of the most important subjects in the book of Deuteronomy. It is closely related to the concept of God's presence, which is one of the most debated issues in the book. So why do I speak about this issue as the most debated? Especially Gerhard von Rath, a very famous theologian of 20th century, spoke about a special theology of the book of Deuteronomy, when in the book of Deuteronomy, the God's presence is substituted by the presence of God's name. So not the God himself is present, but only his name is present. And he spoke a lot about that, and you can even read a lot because it was a very, very discussed issues in the literature. But I would like to pay your attention to some other important moment when we speak about a theophany of the covenant. So the one thing that I already mentioned is that the book of Deuteronomy is presented as the words of Moses. These are not the words of God. These are the words of Moses. These are the words Moses spoke to all Israel in the desert east of the Jordan. So the book of Deuteronomy is the book of the words of Moses. And God almost never speaks in the book of Deuteronomy. And this is a very, very interesting issue. The formula I, Moses commanded, occurs often throughout the book of Deuteronomy. Moses did not teach Israel his own commands, but what he had received from God. However, it is significant that the author emphasizes that the book of Deuteronomy is the words of Moses. So name theology, what I have mentioned to you already, but you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all the tribes to put his name and make his habitation here. There you shall go. Or for example, Deuteronomy 12. Then to the place that the Lord your God will choose to make his name dwell here. There you shall bring all that I command you. So do you see, not God himself will dwell there, but only his name will dwell there. And this is a particular feature of the theology of the book of Deuteronomy. And von Rath's classic formulation of this doctrine states that Deuteronomy's use of the name communicated that not Yahweh, but only his name, as a guarantee of his will to save, dwelt at the cult site. So, but of course, probably we cannot agree completely with what von Rath said. But of course, he is right when he pointed out to this particular feature of the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is obviously attacking the older and more popular idea of Yahweh's immediate presence at the place of worship and substituting for it the theological differentiation between Yahweh on the one hand and his name on the other. Okay, I will not go here very much. The manifestation of God's presence in the book of Deuteronomy is presented differently than in the books of Exodus and Leviticus. And now this is an important part. The book of Deuteronomy does not contain a scene of theophany similar to the ones in the book of Leviticus and Exodus. Yahweh doesn't disclose himself before the whole congregation, as he used to do in the past. It seems that the theophany is substituted by the memory of the theophany at Horeb. The experience which the people had 40 years ago is still valid for the new generation. So now I would like to pay attention to this detail because it is important. In the book of Exodus, we can see that God spoke himself to the people, and people listened to the voice of God, but unfortunately they didn't want to listen to the voice of God anymore. So what happened in the following narrative? We can see that God's presence was manifested through the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that was when they were traveling in the wilderness. But what happened to this pillar of cloud and pillar of fire in the book of Deuteronomy?
It ceased.
Pardon?
It stopped.
It stopped, correct. Mm-hmm. So do you remember when they entered the promised land, there was no pillar anymore. They just, they carried the Ark of the Covenant, and God invisibly was present with them. But there was no any visual manifestations of God's presence. Mm-hmm. So that is why, as von Rad says, God's presence was substituted with the presence of God's name. Okay, so this is an important issue. Although Yahweh is described as present among his people, his presence is hidden. Deuteronomy 31:15 describes the appearance of God in a pillar of cloud before the tent of meeting. However, it seems that this theophany was not revealed to the whole congregation, but to Moses only, as is seen from the character of the speech that follows. God speaks to Moses about the future apostasy of Israel, and Moses retells the content of the speech to the people. Furthermore, the visible appearance of God in a pillar of cloud is almost the last in the Old Testament. So there is no Shekhinah anymore. There is no visible presence of God in the book of Deuteronomy and in the following books of the Old Testament. So now we can see that the question that we need to ask is why it happened like this. So why do we not see God's presence, visible presence among the people? Why is God hiding himself? And we need to go back to Exodus 20, 18:21, and especially to Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 24 to 29. And do you remember, I promised you that we will come back to this passage and we will discuss it in details. So in Exodus chapter 20, verses 18 to 21, we can see that God, after he pronounced the 10 commandments, people were afraid and they didn't want God to speak to them. And probably this is the most important issue when we speak about the covenant issues. When we go to chapter 5, we can see that the same 10 commandments are repeated, and Moses again spoke about the reaction of people. And may I ask somebody of you to read this passage? Deuteronomy 5.
24 up to
All right.
29. I'm reading in a New International Version.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, behold, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and greatness, and we have heard his voice out of the midst of the fire. This day we have seen God speak with man, and man still alive. Now therefore, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of the Lord our God and anymore, we shall die. For who is there of all flesh that has heard the voice of the living God speaking out of the midst of fire, as we heard, and has still lived? Go near and hear all that the Lord our God will say, and keep to us all that the Lord our God will speak to you, and we will hear and do it. And the Lord heard your words when you spoke to me. And the Lord said to me, I have heard the words of these people, which they have spoken to you. They are right in all that they have spoken. 29. All that they had such a heart as this always, of to fear me and to keep all my commandments, that it might go well with them and with their descendants forever.
Okay, thank you very much. So why does God say in this passage that everything that they said is good? So let us come back to the passage and let us see what are they saying. For example, in verse 24, they say, look, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and greatness, and we have heard his voice from the fire. Today we have seen that God speaks with a person and he still lives. So what do they want to say? That it is possible to live in the presence of God. So this is the first statement. But the next statement contradicts the previous one. But now, why shall we die? This great fire will consume us, and we will die if we hear the voice of the Lord our God any longer. So do you see? In the first statement, they say, man can live in the presence of God. But in the second statement, they say, no, we will die if we listen again the voice of God. But what they say later on is even more interesting. For who out of all mankind has heard the voice of the living God speaking from the fire as we have and lived? But this contradicts again the first statement, because in the first statement they saw that it is possible. But now they say, no, it is impossible. And after that, verse 27, they say, go near and listen to everything that the Lord our God says. Then you can tell us everything that the Lord our God tells you. We will listen and obey. So what do they say? They say nobody can survive the presence of God. But after that, they sent Moses and go and say to him, go, you will go there. But it contradicts their previous statement, because they said that nobody can survive and can live and can be in the presence of God. So when we look at this chapter, we can see this passage. We can see that the people contradict themselves. They speak something, and after that they speak something contradictory, and again something contradictory. So there is no consistency in their speech. In this case, we need to understand, why did God say that everything that they said is good? And now we will need our knowledge of Hebrew, because I will not be able to explain it to you just saying something. We need to open the Hebrew, and I want to show you something in Hebrew. Do you remember how is good in Hebrew?
Tov.
Tov, correct. So actually, when God says that everything that they say is good, he could say like this: Kol amartem tov. something like this, or Ribatem Tov. But when we look at this passage, let me here.
Is it not 5:28?
28, yes.
5, chapter 5, Prof.
Oh, sorry, chapter 5, yeah, correct. Yes. So let us try to read and understand. Vaishma Adonai et kol diver rechem and bedav rechem elai. And the Lord heard the voice of your words when you speak to me. Vayomer Adonai Elai, and God said to me, Shamati et kol divrei ha'am hazeh. I heard the voice of the words of these people. Asher diberu elecha, which they spoke to you. And now pay attention to this word. Chetivu kol asher diberu. So actually, if God wanted to say that everything that they said is good, he should say tov here. Tov, kol asher diberu. But he doesn't use adjective tov. He uses the word, the verb, chetivu. And this verb is in gefiel stem. And gefiel stem actually means it is a causative stem. So it means that it will cause, it will lead to something good, okay? So actually what God said, he didn't say that it is good, but he said it will cause, or it will bring something good. It will, how to say it better in English? Their words will be a cause of something good. Or maybe you can help me to say it in a better English. Pastor Poswa, can you help me to say it in better English?
I'm thinking the best way, maybe something like the words that they have spoken will lead to good.
Yes, we can say like this. The words that they have spoken will lead to good, okay? So, and this is, as I understand, is very, very important difference because it is different from, he said it is good, and he said it will bring, or it will lead to something good. And what is also important, that the same phrase is repeated again in chapter 18 of the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, let me just search for this word. Yes, 18:17. Do you see? Vayomer Adonai Elai, Chetivu asher diberu. Exactly the same phrase. And let us open English. Deuteronomy 18:7, I said, yes? '17. And the Lord said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. Of course, it's not the best translation because we already know that it should be translated a little bit differently. And look what he, okay, let us speak. let us see what is in the context. Just as you desired of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, or see his great fire anymore, lest I die. And the Lord said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. So do you see the issue here? God didn't say that all that they have spoken is good, but he says it will lead to something good. And here in chapter 18, he actually explains what is good, what good will be in the future because of their words. So now it is a very, very important issue. And I would like you to remember this, because this will be important for us to understand all the prophetic books. So what happened here in the book of Deuteronomy, not only in the book of Deuteronomy, but in the Pentateuch. We can see that in Exodus 20, people didn't want to listen to God. And Moses repeats the same idea in Deuteronomy 5. He says that people didn't want to listen to the voice of God. And what happened with the covenant? What can we see with the covenant? We can see that the quality of the covenant deteriorates because if you look just at this theophany part, or how God manifested himself in the covenants, we can see that in the very beginning, he wanted to speak directly to the people. After that, he hid himself in the tabernacle, but he was visibly present, so his presence was visible for the people. But now, in the covenant of the book of Deuteronomy, we can see after all those rebellions in the wilderness, God said, okay, my presence will not be visible anymore. So you will not see my presence as you used to see in the wilderness. His presence is hidden from the people. But the way of communication between God and people remains. And this way of communication is through the prophet like Moses. So what does it mean? What does it mean? It means that God will not speak to the entire congregation anymore. Okay? But he will speak to the congregation through the prophet. And now what we can see here, we can see that the institution of prophets is established. In this chapter Deuteronomy 18. So what does it mean? It means that God will communicate with the people through the mediation of the prophet. And every prophet that appears again in the Old Testament resembles Moses. For example, if we can see Joshua in the book of Joshua is presented as the second Moses. We can find some parallels with Moses in many other prophetic books. Like, for example, do you remember how Isaiah was called to the ministry? He refused to go from the very beginning, yes. And Moses also refused to go. So we can see that Isaiah is similar to Moses. Jeremiah, the same. Or for example, Elijah. Elijah has many parallels with Moses. He also went to the Sinai, to Horeb, and spent 40 days he went there. And we can find many other parallels between Elijah and Moses. So now, from now on, God will communicate his will to the people through the mediation of prophets. That is why we have prophetic books in the Old Testament. So is it clear?
It's very clear.
Yeah, it's very clear, Prof. It's I'm sorry, I don't know if I can just comment quickly, Prof.
Please.
So it seems as if all these offices that we see in Israel, it's God adjusting to the people not accepting his original plan. Because the priests are there because the people refused God's original plan.
Yes.
The prophets are there because people refused God's original plan. It seems as if the kings are there later on because people reject God from being their king. So all these things we see, they are positive, they are good, but they are not the best because they are an improvement. I mean, God condescends to meet the people where they are.
Yes. Correct. So we can see that those relationships deteriorates with every new generation. And the ideal that was presented to God, but people cannot accept it, cannot withstand with this God's plan. So that is why those relationship or those covenant promises or covenant relationship, they deteriorate. But anyway, one day it should come back to the normal, what God wants to give to the people, and we will see it just a little bit later today. So let us continue. I am happy that you understood my idea.
Yes, Prof.
Yes, please.
Can we say that during the time of Israelites, especially when there was a renewal and making a covenant, God was so much furious, and therefore the people scared, and he tried to change the spokesman, and therefore now introduces the prophets to speak on the behalf of the people?
Oh, yeah. So very good question, Pastor Karani. Now we need to understand also why the prophet is needed. Because it looks like God gave them priests, and priests and Levites were responsible for teaching people how to live according to the law of God. But what happened, and we will see what happened later on in the history of Israel, when priests are not able to perform their functions properly, or they are corrupted, or for some other reasons, and when Levites are not able to perform. So now what happens to the people? People go away from God. They start worshiping idols. They do many other bad things. So what did God do in this situation? He sends a prophet, and prophet comes, and his actually ministry is to return people back to God. Do you remember the prophecy of Elijah? Elijah's mission was to bring people back to proper worship of God. So this was the mission of the prophets. So prophets are sent usually to Israel when everything is very bad, and God wants them to come back to him. And that is why when we read the books of the prophets, all of them are very, very sad, because all of them usually speak about the sins of the people, and that God wants to do something in order to revive people. So this was the purpose of the prophets in the Old Testament. I don't speak about the New Testament because actually the ultimate prophet and not the best prophet par excellence or whatever, is Jesus Christ. So he also came as a prophet. And Deuteronomy chapter 18 is a messianic prophecy, because he will be the best representation of God, of the word of God. He will bring people back to God. And this is his ministry, to bring people back to God. Okay, I don't know, did I answer your question?
You have answered, Prof, because I was trying to relate, and in fact to catch up my mind with the entire book of Deuteronomy, and therefore I've come to the conclusion that is whatever written down is about, it also reflects so much in our present, because even when and how Moses and other prophets reached to condemn the sin, it is relating closely to the world of today, because there was a warning the message, but people, they are hardened their hearts, and they don't want to hear or even to follow the instructions of the Lord.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go further. Yeah, again, one more interesting feature in the book of Deuteronomy is the change of the revelation. So we will also see it, and it is presented in the book of Venema. This book is very interesting, especially his treatment of these issues, reading scriptures in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy, Kings, Jeremiah, and Nehemiah. So especially when he tries to explain this section about Deuteronomy is very, very interesting, and I would like to recommend this book to you as well. So the story of the tablets of the covenant illustrates how the concept of God's verbal revelation has changed under the conditions of the new covenant. Here Moses retells the story of the golden calf. However, in this story, the accent is shifted from the calf to the tablets of the covenant. In Exodus 32, 1-35, the tablets of stone figure in the story of the golden calf, whereas conversely, in Deuteronomy, the golden calf figures in the story about the tablets of stone. So the emphasis are changed. For example, in Exodus 34, emphasis on the shining of Moses' face. In Deuteronomy 10:5, emphasis, Moses put the tablets in the ark. Moses did more than just put the tablets of stone in a chest. He actually puts them away. As we shall see, the tablets of stone will not come out of the ark again. From now on, the words inscribed on the tablets of stone are hidden words. So do you understand this idea, what Venema wants to explain? So the same, the verbal revelation of God. So God doesn't speak himself anymore, but even these tablets of stone, where he, by his hand, wrote the commandments, even those commandments are not available to the people anymore, because the tablets are hidden in the Ark of the Covenant, and they never shown to the people. But people can know what is written there from the book of the law. And the book of the law is supposed to be kept beside the Ark of the Covenant. So what is hidden in the ark is hidden from the people. They do not have access to it, but they have access to the book of the law. The juxtaposition of the book of the law and the tablets of the covenant is significant in the sense that the tablets remain hidden, but the book of the law is available to all Israelites. In order to hear, learn, and perform them, the Ten Commandments, Israel, according to Deuteronomy, has to rely on the words spoken by Moses himself and written in his book of the Torah. So do you see, Venema very well explains this change of the verbal revelation. Now God doesn't speak directly to the people, and even his 10 commandments that he wrote himself is not available to people anymore, and everything is possible only through the meditation of Moses, who was a prophet. So now everything is possible through the intercession or through the ministry of the prophets, all communication between God and the people. Thus, the book of Deuteronomy presents a new model of divine revelation. From now on, God's will is transmitted through the meditation of the prophets, who will be like Moses. The people will not see the fire and the cloud of the theophany again, even the tablets preserving God's original words are hidden in the Ark of the Covenant that has a symbolical meaning. Their content can be perceived through the book of the law, which is made known as the words of Moses. So, and this is important issue when we speak about the verbal revelation, and again, and in general, the way of communication between God and people. And what we can say about the ritual of the covenant, the ritual of the covenant renewal does not appear in the book of Deuteronomy, but Moses gives detailed instructions on how it should be performed upon conquering the promised land. And as I told you, it is done. The ritual of the covenant is depicted in the book of Joshua. And I just would like you to compare how the ritual of the covenant differs from the covenant of the book of Exodus and the covenant of the book of Deuteronomy. Elders were involved in both ceremonies, yes. The altar was to be of uncut stones, yes. All the words of the Lord were written by Moses at Horeb into the book of the covenant on the in Deuteronomy on the plastered stones after entering the promised land. Burnt offering and peace offering should be brought, yes. The ceremony was concluded with the feast, yes. And if you really obey the voice of the Lord, this phrase is present in both cases. So we can really say that this is a continuation of this covenant, Exodus covenant, because almost everything is the same. Unlike in Exodus 24, God doesn't take an active part in the ritual described in Deuteronomy 27. He is invisibly present. Many elements of the renewed covenant just remind of the Sinai covenant, but are different from it. Thus, the words, "If you really obeyed my voice," which have been pronounced by God, are now pronounced by the Levites. The stones to be set up, in Deuteronomy 27:2, only remind of the stone tablets. They should be plastered, and the laws of the covenant should be engraved upon them, not by God, but by the people. And no theophany is mentioned in this ritual. So we can see, even comparing these rituals, we can see that this covenant is not like the previous covenants. But we can see that this covenant is deteriorated, or how to say, it's not as good as the previous one. And when we speak about the covenants in the Pentateuch, we can present this graph, and I hope it will help you to understand it better. So do you see what happened? Sinai covenant, and this was like ideal covenant for the Israelites. But unfortunately, they were not able to keep this covenant, and they broke this covenant, golden calf. After that, we can see that the covenant was with the first generation. It was restored, but this new covenant was not as good as this one. So it was just the covenant to temporary covenant. Oh, excuse me. Yes. Yes, good afternoon. Yes. Okay, excuse me. So what we have here, we have Sinai covenant. After that, we have golden calf. The new covenant is not as good as the previous one. After that, we have Baal Peor, and we said that during this incident, it was like a repetition of the golden calf because the covenant was again broken. And after that, we have a renewal of the covenant at Moab in the book of Deuteronomy. But unfortunately, this covenant is not as good even as the previous one, because here we don't see the visible representation of God. So God is only invisibly present with the people. And what is also important, Moses spoke in his final speech that he knows that after his death, there will be more other rebellions. So he says that many rebellions will happen in Israel after his death. So we can see that those relationships, like we can see this deterioration of the relationship between God and the people. And finally, what we can say about the new covenant. So do you see, and you already noticed it, and we spoke about that during our classes, that the promises of the Sinai covenant are repeated in the New Testament, So when Peter, for example, says that we are royal priesthood, when in the book of in the book of Revelation, we can see the same promises that all of us are kings and priests. So what we can say that this covenant of the book of Sinai, it was restored finally when Jesus came. And it is very important to see that Jesus is presented as the second Moses. He is the prophet who is promised in the book of Deuteronomy, and he's the one who should restore this original Sinai covenant. So that is why I don't agree when people say that the Sinai covenant is an old covenant, or like it is only just for Israelites. No, the promises of the covenant are very good, and those promises were restored, finally restored in the new covenant. When when all of us were restored in the status of Adam, because all of us are royal priesthood. And again, we have access to God, because every time when we kneel down and pray, we can enter the heavenly sanctuary, as it was during the time of patriarchs. So do you see, Jesus restored those broken and deteriorated relationship between God and people. Okay, so it seems to me that this is the end of my presentation for today. Yes, this is the end of the presentation. And I hope that this class will help you to understand better, not only the Pentateuch, but to understand better the entire Old Testament, because the Pentateuch is the basis. And if you understand what happened in the Pentateuch, it is easier for us to understand what is written in the historical books, in the prophetic books, and in other parts of the Old Testament. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Yes, Prof.
Yes, please.
Although my question is about, I was waiting you to comment something about the divorce. Narrated in the book of DEuteornomy.
Chapter 24?
Yes, 21 to 24.
21 to 24. Does he say anything in 21 about the divorce? As far as I know, the only place about the divorce is chapter 24. And this several verses that we have here is very enigmatic. And I read a lot of commentaries on that. And I didn't find any commentary that could answer all the questions that there are here in this passage. But what is interesting, do you see this passage of Deuteronomy 24 doesn't tell us about that God allowed divorce. God didn't allow divorce. In the book of Malachi, we can see that God says, I hate divorce. But what is written here in chapter 24, it is not about the divorce when man should, or when man or woman can divorce their spouse. But it is just a situation when divorce happened, so how to deal with one particular situation. For example, if husband divorced her wife and wife married another man, and another man died or also divorced her. So in this case, the wife cannot come back to the first husband, or in other words, a husband cannot take her back. So this is the only situation that is described in chapter 24. And one of the most enigmatic expression here is ervat davar. And ervat davar is, which is translated, for example, in my version, something incident about her or displeasing to him. But she becomes displeasing to him. So if he finds something, and this something is ervat davar. So many scholars try to understand what this phrase means, ervat davar, something like related to, but it's very difficult to say what it is exactly, because it is not, it cannot be an adultery, because if it is an adultery, there are some other laws, and according to those laws, the woman should be stoned should be sentenced for stoning. But it is not here, so it is not stoned, but it is a very difficult issue. So now I cannot give you an answer. But what is important here, in the Pentateuch, there is nothing about the divorce. And Jesus actually confirmed this. He says that from the beginning, it was not like this. God didn't want and didn't intend people to divorce. But what we can understand from those verses and from this passage is that people lived in the ancient Near East environment, and in other countries, it looks like divorce existed. That is why these traditions or these customs of divorce penetrated in Israel. And that is why Moses dealt with this issue in Deuteronomy 24. But in the Pentateuch, we cannot find anything that God prescribed that you can divorce in this case or that case. Only Jesus in the New Testament says that the only possible reason for the divorce is adultery.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Okay, so if there are no questions anymore, may we make a picture, final picture. May I ask you, all of you, to show up, to show the video, and I just want to have a picture of all of us. Pastor Ezra, are you with us? Pastor Joseph Karani?
I'm there, Prof.
Yeah, okay. I see you. Yes, Pastor Ezra, Pastor Laurent, and Pastor, yes, Pastor Laurent. Okay, so it looks maybe like he doesn't hear